Welcome to one of the last days of 2024, and we'll get right into it. Nikki, you're up.
Well, hello everyone, and I hope you all had a wonderful holiday over the last week and have found some time to relax with some family and some friends. We've had quite an interesting market last week and into today. We saw some interest rates shoot up over the last week, just in response to the end of the year, in response to kind of just the Fed changing their mind a little bit about what they predict that they're going to do with interest rates into 2025. With that being said, today has been an amazing day for the bond market and for the mortgage interest rates. We made up for a lot of that loss that we saw last week. So interest rates are going to be in the high sixes, low sevens. Last week we saw them into the into the low sevens, into the mid sevens. So we've seen a little bit of an improvement today, and we expect that to happen through tomorrow. Just kind of keeping us at that level between somewhere between 6.5 and 7 1/8 right up until the new year. So a lot of that is a result of just it being the end of year and anyone needing to sell off their stocks to make up for any losses or anything for that to prepare for the 2024 tax season. So that's kind of what has caused that at the end of the year. So we'll just kind of continue to monitor things. A couple of reports that I've been reading have said that in 2025, the interest rates should get down into the low six, mid five to low six, they're predicting, which will be good for the spring market. They are predicting a very strong market next year as far as home sales go, as we see the interest rates come down. So we want to make sure that our buyers that are on the fence or anyone that has been searching the last year and waiting for those interest rates to come down, that we get ahead of them, ahead of those interest rates and ahead of those home buyers, because obviously as the interest rates come down, there's going to be more competition for the inventory. And just as a reminder, 1% lowering of interest rate introduces 5 million new potential buyers into the market. So obviously, there's going to be more in some areas than other areas, but just keep that in mind because it's very interesting as we see these interest rates start to come down. And as always, I'll be keeping track and making sure that you guys have your weekly updates so you know what's happening from that standpoint too. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is on the mortgage side of things, just initial upfront costs of transaction from a mortgage standpoint. I know a lot of people who come into the market to buy, a lot of them are first-time home buyers and don't understand all the money that goes into it upfront from a real estate transaction standpoint. You guys as realtors obviously talk about, how your commission is going to be paid and when that's going to be paid, but also upfront costs like inspection, some upfront, things like that that are really out-of-pocket expenses as you start to go down this path of getting an accepted purchase agreement. From the mortgage side, we collect upfront a fee for the appraisal. We collect only appraisal fees upfront. Some lenders are collect not only appraisal fees, but they'll also collect credit report fees upfront. But as a practice for us, we collect that appraisal fee upfront. Usually that's anywhere between $500 to $700, depending on the transaction type. And if we do get the appraisal for less than that amount, that obviously that upfront amount will be refunded to them. So as we're talking about earnest money, we're talking about, inspections. We also got to talk about, oh, there's also a cost to the appraisal upfront. And so that kind of comes as a surprise to some people when we do get accepted purchase agreements and saying, oh, I thought I would only have to pay my earnest money and my inspection cost. But just an FYI, we do collect those appraisal fees up front. And like I said, anything that is not used is refunded back to them at closing. So just something to keep in mind if you do have a client that's maybe a first-time home buyer or that's using down payment assistance, especially, that can be a little bit tight for them to come up with an additional $500 that they didn't know about. So those are just the conversations that we want to have with them and make sure that they know that there is an upfront cost from an appraisal standpoint, so we can make sure to get ahead of those things as well. Those are just kind of just some things that I've been seeing as we work into, the new year and new people coming on board as far as clients go.
Yeah. No, and that's a very good reminder because if you're not as an agent, really setting your clients up for success. And this is why I will always go back to the buyer consultation or meeting a buyer and really going through all the steps. It was so funny since joining EXP because I'm so connected with so many people across the country. Being in Minnesota, that's how I was trained. You know,
Yep.
that was always like the NAR settlement we went through this last year really had a very minimal effect on us because we were one of 13 states that already had all of our documents and our forms and our conversations for the most part in order. But when I joined here and I was talking to different agents in the states that may not have had the forms, a lot of agents didn't even do buyer consultations. I mean, the very good ones that we partnered with mostly did, but just in interviewing people and talking to other agents that might be looking for coaching, they weren't trained that way, or they didn't even understand it or have a template or just see the value or benefit in it. And it is so very important to meet with your buyers, if not in person, on Zoom. You can have all the paperwork ready to go, share your screen, go through it all, and talk to them about that. Talk to them about the out-of-pocket fees. And I love that you bring that up because I was actually trained way back when to let the lender talk about the appraisal fees, that I shouldn't really bring it up because I wouldn't know it or not. But I don't necessarily agree with that because we want to be the quarterback, being in football season, of the whole transaction. So we should be able to, tee it up and set it up for them so that they
Right.
understand. And then you as the lender come in and you just reinforce that. And then, wow, we really look like we know what we're talking about because what we said would happen will happen and is
Yep.
happening as they're talking with you. So it's just so very important
It
to
is.
understand. Definitely, and I'm all about staying in my lane. Like that's why Nikki, I'll be like, talk to Nikki, talk to Nikki. This is what I think, but talk to Nikki, talk to Nikki.
Right.
Because you want to know enough to be dangerous, and also as a real estate agent, say it with confidence, with conviction, and yet with a little quote, air quote, or caveat being you always want to talk with Nikki just to make
Correct.
sure this is what I've heard, or this is what I remember, or this is what it was like 3 months ago. However, as you know, things change very, very quickly. So even what might have happened in a transaction 3 months to half a year ago, it could be different. Is that
Right.
something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of assumption that'll happen with some agents that I've seen where it's like they just assume the buyer knows that their earnest money goes towards the closing costs on the lender side, or they assume that, the buyer knows that the appraisal is a separate thing from the inspection. A lot of first-time home buyers don't understand that an inspection is not the same as an appraisal, and that an appraisal is for lending purposes only, not for saying that there's anything alerting or wrong with the home. So it's really interesting, just kind of some of the feedback that we get is having those upfront cost discussions, but also saying, okay, when, how much earnest money do you want to put down? Well, know that that goes towards your out-of-pocket spot, expenses from a down payment and closing cost standpoint. And, so just making sure that they understand, what the all-in costs are and then breaking it down like you've already paid this amount, you've already paid this amount, and that inspection fee doesn't go towards anything on the actual mortgage side or the down payment or the closing costs. That's a completely separate, part of the transaction than anything having to do with what we do on our side.
Mhm.
So that's kind of, making that distinction is important as well.
Yeah. Well, and to piggyback on that, I see some different posts or some things that come up, or even in dealing with you or other lenders in the past. When you're going up against a buyer who is getting multiple quotes, if one really looks better than the other, can you talk a little bit and educate us as agents, and maybe if any buyers or potential buyers are watching, on where these hidden fees could be? Or, I mean, I've heard people up to $12,000 difference that these lenders are hiding. And number one, why do they do that? And what does that look like in us as agents? I mean, again, I always send it to you to look at review. You know
Yeah.
better than I do. But if they bring in a statement or if they send it to us, what should we be looking for, or anything that you can share with us on that?
Well, I will tell you that most of the time when I personally see a discrepancy between what I've quoted a client and what they get from another lender, most of the time it has to do with the escrow account. So in other words, how much money they're collecting up front for that tax and insurance account. That is most of the time what I see as the difference. The other time, what I'll see is they will kind of like charge what's called an origination fee. So instead of buying down the interest rate, they'll charge a 1% upfront fee just to do the mortgage. It's called an origination fee, which is different from underwriting and processing fees, but they'll charge that. And then way down on the bottom, they'll reverse or credit back a part of it. And then it'll be very confusing to the buyer as to what their actual costs are. Because the idea is that you have all these costs and then, oh, look at me as a lender, I'm discounting this down so that it doesn't look as bad coming to the client. But every time, one of the discussions that I always have with a client, whether they bought one home or they're buying 75 homes, the discussion always, remember, I've included escrow account numbers, in this. Most of your cost for this transaction goes into funding that escrow account. And that's true, across states, and that's true across, just how my experience is with lending. I mean, you have, on a $300,000 purchase, you got to be prepared for five to $6,000 of that coming just into the escrow account, for taxes and insurance and upfront insurance costs. That's one thing. The other cost that, a lot of people, a lot of buyers get confused on is the actual cost of mortgage insurance. So that's a monthly cost for most clients, but we can do it upfront and we can do it, worked into the closing cost. So sometimes those discussions, like let's say you have a seller that's paying 3%, what's the best way we can use that seller's 3% closing cost to help this client get, use all of it and make sure that maybe we can reduce their monthly cost or something like that. So it's just those little discrepancies. Most of the time it has to do with escrow accounts or per diem interest or something of that nature that's very variable depending on the time of year that you close and when taxes and insurance are due for that particular property. And that's really most of the time what I see a discrepancy on. Now, there's some times where you'll have a lender that'll quote a rate with discount points that's a little bit hidden, and it ends up being, if we do an apples for apples comparison, it's pretty spot on, or if we're not a little bit better. But like I said, most of the time it has to do with that escrow account and making sure that it's funded properly and stuff like that. So when I do my side-by-side comparisons, most of the time it has to do with maybe a couple $100 here and there from different lenders. So it's really not, I don't see a huge difference as far as fees go, as far as interest rates go, things like that, from lender to lender anymore. There's just not enough margin and there's not enough availability to be earned on that side that there's huge discrepancies anymore. It just hasn't happened, especially in this past year when those margins are so slim now.
Yep. Perfect. Good. Well, and then the other thing, because I know you've been doing this for 25 years. I was going to say a quarter of a century, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the length of time. So I would love for you to just go back and touch on, as agents, knowing that you've seen a lot, you saw what happened when interest rates were way low and so many buyers were out and we were, not getting inspections. I had a buyer that said they'd pay $40,000 cash over, because it just gets so crazy. And we talked about this, that it's going to be a really good year is what we're predicting in real estate. So there's going to be a lot of buyers re-entering the market. And I don't know if there's any type of, formula or any type of, numbers that you can put to that. But talking to our buyers that have been on the fence or maybe, lost out on a few offers in homes and just decided to sit on the sidelines for a while, as agents, what can we say to not motivate them, but educate them of why
Yeah.
now is the time?
That's really interesting that you bring that up because I was just reading this morning an article talking about that exact same thing. Like they were basing the information that they had given on a $700,000 home, which is a little bit above what a lot of people can afford at this point. But what they were saying is if you take the national average of appreciation of 4.1% and you bought a home at the beginning of 2024 when interest rates were at 7%,
Mhm.
and then you wait if you bought the home when interest rates were at 7% with 20% down on a $700,000, that total increased cost for that 7% interest rate was about $2,200 over the course of the year. The difference between like a 6% and a 7%. Does that make sense? The
Mhm.
payment difference was about $2,100. Then if you say, okay, the cost to refinance this home or this property or this loan, once those interest rates drop to 6%, is going to cost me, they say on average, it's about $3,500, which is pretty accurate as far as fees go and refinance costs and title costs and about that much. So let's just call it 3,500. So the total like out-of-pocket cost to hold that 7% interest rate for a year is about, let's call it about $5,500. Let's just say $6,000 to round up. Okay. So at $6,000. Well, if you waited till 2025 to purchase that same property is going to cost you $728,000 if we take the national average of appreciation of 4.1% into consideration. So you say, okay, that now that property is going to cost you $728,000 and you're going to have a 6% interest rate. Well, number one, your payment's about the same. But number two, you, even if we take into that $6,000 it costs to refinance that, you are going, and the increased payments and all those costs that I just talked about, you are still money ahead by purchasing the home at 7%, 700,000 versus 728
Mm.
at 6%. And so it's just one of those things that like a lot of there's a cost to waiting is basically what the point is that every year that passes, if that home that you're going to have that you want to purchase is going to go up by on average 4.1%. Some years it's going to be more and some years it's going to be a little bit less. But that's when we can sit there and say, well, the 1% difference in interest rate is that, really a huge difference to me if I know that in 12 to 18 months, cyclically on interest rates, those go up and down every 12 to 18 months. So I know that in a year and a half, I'm going to be able to refinance this down and get a better payment. And I'm willing to spend the $3,500 or the $4,000 to refinance it down to one interest rate, 1% lower. My cost of waiting, I've actually am ahead of the game now. And that's kind of the point of it is like, yes, interest rates were in the 7% in 2024, up and down, up and down. They did get down to 5.625, 5.5 at one point, as we all remember, for that 2 week time frame. But my question is, for myself, like, what is the cost of waiting? How much is this going to cost me over time in appreciation alone on a property? And how much more am I going to have to pay for this property? Because there's been people that we know have been on the fence since 2023. So those people, let's call it a $300,000 home at 4%. I mean, you're $26,000 equity into this situation that you're now paying 326 for a property that you could have had at 300,000 2 years ago at 7%. So you just kind of, it's one of those things where it's like the math doesn't lie. And if we do a comparison and we say, okay, this is what it's going to be, a lot of people can come to the conclusion that they can make a smart, educated decision on those numbers if we're just playing the numbers game and saying, okay, what are the actual dollar for dollar differences between 2024 and 2025?
Yeah,
So it's really interesting.
that is. No, I
And we can run
every
those
time.
numbers on any number of scenarios. Like if we have a client that says, I don't know, send them my way. I can run those scenarios and say, okay, here's what it looks like every year that you wait.
Yes. And
And that might
agents
help.
do that. Reach out to Nikki, use her as a resource. If you have these buyers, it is your job to
Mhm.
partner with them and show them what they don't know. You're the expert. You hold the real estate license. So
Right.
really know these numbers because I love how you broke that down. I've heard it before, but not quite that way. And it is so, so true. So if you can paint them the full picture instead of just like one brush stroke, which is what
Right.
they're getting. And if they're listening to a lot of what they're hearing or seeing, much of it is misinformation or has been. So let's get them the full picture of actually what this looks like, what it
Right.
actually is costing them versus just this tunnel vision of what people are looking at.
Yeah.
I love that. And Nikki
And
can
it's done with
absolutely.
the intention of being
Mhm.
transparent and not the
Yeah,
intention of giving fear. The
correct.
idea is like, here's what the numbers say. You
Yeah,
get to make your own decision for yourself, and that's okay,
yeah,
but here's the numbers and, just really being forthright and transparent with what those numbers are actually saying.
yeah. Love it. Love it all. Well, wonderful. I can't thank you enough for that and your offer to help. So if you have a
Yep.
buyer who's been waiting the last year or two, or maybe is just, not in as engaged as you'd like them to be in the process or a little fearful or whatever it is, reach out to Nikki, tell her what's going on and she can run some scenarios. And if you need a script with me or talk to someone about what this looks like and how to have these conversations, let's do that because it's now's the time. And if we can get some of these buyers taken care of ahead of that madness, they will thank you in the end.
Absolutely.
I can guarantee it. Good. Well, wonderful. Well, happy New Year. coming up
Happy New Year to
here.
you. Yes, this is going to be great. 2025 is going to be awesome.
I can't wait. I cannot wait. And yeah, have a good one. And reach out to us, anyone, if you need anything. Other than that, we will see you here next Monday.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.